Sign it and get out. You were a charity case from the beginning." Eleanor Whitmore slapped the divorce papers onto the table so hard the room went silent. Then she grabbed Olivia's wrist, twisted it, and forced the pen between her fingers like she was handling something disposable. Andrew watched his mother's hand crushing his wife's wrist. He looked down at his phone. 8 years. And he looked at his phone. That single moment, that one cowardly, devastating silence, was the last thing Olivia needed to see. She signed every page. She stood up slowly. She walked out without a single word, because the woman they just threw away owned more than they would ever know. If this story moves something in your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow Olivia's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The conference room inside the Whitmore family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, smelled like money. Not the kind of money that comes from working long hours and saving every dollar. The other kind. Old money. The kind that lived inside mahogany walls and Persian rugs and paintings that nobody in the house actually looked at anymore because they'd been hanging there so long they'd become invisible. Olivia Bennett had spent 8 years inside those walls, 8 years of learning which fork to use at dinner, 8 years of smiling at people who never bothered to learn her middle name, 8 years of loving the man who she would eventually come to understand had never once truly seen her. And now she sat at the long conference table, her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight, while the family's attorney slid a thick stack of documents across the polished surface toward her. The room felt like a courtroom, or an execution chamber. To her left sat Andrew Whitmore, 38 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than most people's rent. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through something as though this moment, the legal ending of 8 years of marriage, was an appointment he was trying to get through before lunch. To Olivia's right sat no one. She had come alone. Andrew's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Gerald Marsh, cleared his throat and began explaining the terms. A small monthly stipend. The right to stay in the Greenwich guest cottage, not the main house, the guest cottage, for a period of no longer than 60 days. No claim to any Whitmore business interest. No claim to the primary residence. Personal belongings only. Gerald's voice was perfectly neutral as he recited these terms the way a man reads a grocery list. Boring. Routine. Already decided. Olivia listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. And that her stillness seemed to bother Eleanor Whitmore more than anything else could have. Eleanor sat at the head of the table because Eleanor always sat at the head of whatever table she occupied. She was 63 years old, immaculately dressed in pale gray, with silver hair pulled back into a style that communicated control in every strand. She had the kind of beauty that had once been warm and was now cold, like a fireplace that hadn't been lit in a very long time. She had never liked Olivia. She had said so in various polished ways over the course of 8 years, never with cruelty that could be directly quoted, always with precision. A tilted look here, a comment about Olivia's background there, a gentle suggestion at a dinner party that Andrew might want to consider someone with more experience in these circles. Eleanor had spent 8 years trying to push Olivia out of this family, and now finally she had won. But Olivia's calm was bothering her. "Do you understand what's being offered?" Eleanor asked, cutting across Gerald's voice. Gerald stopped talking and pressed his lips together. Olivia looked at Eleanor. "Yes," she said. "I understand everything." "Good." Eleanor reached forward and adjusted the position of a pen that was already sitting perfectly straight on the table. "Then let's not drag this out." Andrew finally put down his phone. He glanced at Olivia for the first time since she'd entered the room. There was something in his expression that he was working hard to suppress. Not guilt exactly, something more complicated than that. Something that looked almost like relief, but relief mixed with a low, persistent discomfort, the way a person feels when they've been carrying a weight for a long time and have finally put it down, but aren't entirely sure they should have. "Olivia," he said. His voice was quieter than his mother's. "You understand this is the best arrangement we could put together, given the circumstances. Given the circumstances." That was how he described the end of their marriage, given the circumstances. Olivia looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back down at the papers. "I know," she said. She picked up the pen. Now here was the moment when everyone in that room, Eleanor, Andrew, Gerald, the junior associate sitting near the door, expected something to happen. They expected Olivia to pause dramatically. They expected her to say something cutting, something that would hang in the air like smoke. They expected, perhaps, for the polished surface of her composure to finally crack and reveal the grief underneath, because grief was what they had built their entire expectation of this scene around. They had prepared for grief. They had prepared for argument. Eleanor had even privately prepared a speech about dignity and letting go, just in case Olivia decided to make things dramatic. But Olivia did none of those things. She signed the documents, one page, then the next, then the next, calmly, without rushing, without hesitation, without a single word. When she was done, she set the pen down with the same quietness with which she had picked it up. She folded her hands again. She looked at Gerald. "Is there anything else I need to do today?" Gerald blinked. He was a man who had handled a great many divorces, and he could count on one hand the number of times a settlement signing had felt this undramatic. "No," he said. That should be everything." Olivia nodded. She pushed her chair back. She stood up. Eleanor, who had been braced for a scene that never came, suddenly found herself off balance. "That's it," she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost not disappointed exactly, but unsatisfied, like a person who had loaded a gun and never gotten to fire it. Olivia looked at her. "That's it," she said, and then she picked up her bag and walked out of the room. Nobody spoke for a full 10 seconds after the door closed behind her. Then Andrew let out a long breath through his nose. "That went better than I expected," he said. Eleanor watched the closed door. "Yes," she said slowly, "it did." But something in her expression didn't match her words. Something flickered behind her eyes, quick and gone. The look of a woman who has just watched a chess piece move in a direction she didn't expect and isn't quite sure yet what it means for the board. Outside, the air was October cold, the way Connecticut air gets when summer has packed up and left without saying goodbye. The Whitmore estate gates were iron-tall, dramatic, the kind of gates that told you before you even rang the bell what kind of people lived inside. Olivia walked through them without looking back. A black SUV sat parked along the road 20 yards from the gate. Not a flashy car, quiet. The kind of car that attracts no attention, which was exactly the point. The driver got out when he saw her. He was a man in his 50s, broad and careful, with the quiet competence of someone who has worked for powerful people long enough to understand that the most important part of his job was his silence. "Miss Sterling," he said. Olivia stopped. She hadn't heard that name in years. It moved through her like a current. She took a breath. "It's all right, Marcus," she said. "Old habits." She got in. The door closed. The gate of the Whitmore estate disappeared behind her. In the back seat of the SUV, Olivia sat with her hands in her lap and looked out the window at the Connecticut landscape moving past the trees stripped halfway bare by October, the sky the color of an old photograph. Marcus drove without speaking. He had worked for her grandfather since before Olivia was born. He understood silence better than most people understood conversation. After several minutes, Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a phone. Not her usual phone, a different one. Older, simple. The kind of phone that doesn't have social media or news alerts or any of the 100 small invasions of modern life. She turned it on. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she pressed call. It rang twice. "Is this really you?" The voice on the other end was deep and slightly rough around the edges, the way voices get when they've been used for 8 decades. But underneath the age was something that was still precise, still sharp, still completely in command. Her grandfather, Charles Sterling. Olivia closed her eyes. She hadn't called this number in 8 years. She had left this number behind when she left everything else behind: the name, the estate, the weight of being someone that other people immediately recognized, immediately reassessed, immediately wanted something from. She had left it all behind because she was 24 years old, and she wanted more than anything she had ever wanted in her life to know if someone could look at her and see her. Just her. Not what she came from, not what she was worth, not what knowing her could do for their career or their social standing or their ambition. Just her. "Yes, Grandpa," she said. Her voice was steady, but only just. "It's really me." A silence stretched across the line. The kind of silence that contains a great many things that can't be said. Then Charles Sterling spoke. "Are you all right?" Olivia almost laughed. She didn't. "I will be," she said. I need to come home." Another silence. Shorter this time. "Then come home," he said, and his voice had changed the way a room changes when someone opens a window, more air in it, more warmth. "I'll have everything ready." Olivia nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She ended the call. She looked out the window again at the bare trees. For the first time since walking into that conference room, something moved across her face that was not composure. It was not grief either. It was something quieter and older than both of those things. Relief. The kind that comes not from escaping something, but from finally stopping the effort of pretending. The woman who had signed away her life in a Greenwich conference room did not go to a studio apartment. She did not eat a bowl of cereal alone at a small table and cry. Marcus drove her directly to a private airfield 20 minutes outside the city. A plane was waiting, small by the standards of what her family owned. Practical. Ready. As she climbed the stairs and settled into the seat, Olivia allowed herself 1 minute, exactly 1 minute, to close her eyes and remember. She remembered the first time she met Andrew Whitmore. She had been working at a small bookstore in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She had taken a job there after leaving her family, after shedding her last name the way a person sheds a winter coat in spring. She wasn't hiding exactly. She was testing something. Herself. The world. Whether it was possible to be known for who you were rather than what you were born into. Andrew had come into the bookstore on a Tuesday afternoon looking for a birthday gift for his sister. He was charming, a little nervous in the way of men who aren't used to not knowing something and clearly not sure what to buy. Olivia had helped him choose. They talked for almost 40 minutes about books, which turned into a conversation about everything else, which ended with Andrew asking if she would have dinner with him. She said yes. And the thing that still hurt even now in a soft and distant way, was that it had been real in the beginning. Andrew had genuinely been curious about her. He had wanted to know her thoughts, her opinions, her history. She had given him her thoughts and her opinions. She had not given him her history, not the real one. And for a while that had been fine. They built something together. Small, honest theirs. She watched him grow from a capable man into an ambitious one. She supported his career. She believed in him in the quiet, consistent way that people who love you believe in you, not with trumpets and applause, but with a steady presence that says, "I see your potential, even when you can't." But ambition changes people. It doesn't always change them in the ways they hope it will. Andrew became successful, genuinely successful, and success, she came to understand, had confirmed for him something. He had always, somewhere beneath his charm, believed that the world organized itself around people like him. Deserving people, people who had earned their place, and Olivia, who had never shown him proof of earning anything, had slowly shifted in his mind from the woman he loved to the woman he had graciously elevated. She watched it happen. She watched the shift in how he introduced her at parties from "my wife Olivia" to "my wife, she used to work in a bookstore, can you believe it?" She watched the way his mother's comments about her background began to land differently in Andrew's expressions, leaving small marks where before they had slid off entirely. She watched and she said nothing, because part of her, the part that had built this life on the hope that love could be unconditional, kept waiting for him to choose her. He didn't. He chose Victoria Hale instead. Victoria, who was the daughter of a Boston investment family. Victoria, who went to the right schools and attended the right events and could discuss quarterly earnings at dinner without looking at her phone. Victoria, who made Eleanor smile in a way Olivia never had. Olivia had found out the way people always find out, not in a dramatic moment, but in a small one. A text message on a phone left open on the kitchen counter. 3 sentences. Enough. She had stood in the kitchen of the Whitmore estate for a long time after that. Then she had gone upstairs, changed her clothes, come back down, made dinner, because that was what she did, what she had always done. She took whatever she was feeling and she made something useful out of it. And in the 3 months between that moment in the kitchen and this morning in the conference room, she had done something else useful. She had called her grandfather's attorney, not to start a fight. Not yet. Just to understand exactly what she was walking into and exactly what she would do when she walked out. The plane landed in New York. A car was waiting. Olivia was taken to a building in Midtown that the Sterling family had owned for 40 years, floor 27, an office that had once been her grandfather's primary base of operations, which he now mostly used for meetings he considered important enough to leave the Connecticut estate for. When she walked in, Charles Sterling was standing at the window. He was 81 years old. He stood like a man who had decided a long time ago that age was a negotiation he intended to win. His hair was white, his hands were spotted, but his posture was straight and his eyes dark, precise, already assessing everything the moment. Olivia walked through the door. Those had not changed at all. He turned around. He looked at her. "You look thin," he said. "Hello to you too, Grandpa." He crossed the room and put his hands on her shoulders. He looked at her face the way people look at something they've been worried about checking, cataloging, relieved to find it still intact. "I'm all right," she said before he could ask again. "I know you are," he said. "You're a Sterling. We don't break." He said it in a tone that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite warning, something in between. He let her go and moved toward the seating area, a cluster of leather chairs around a low table, the kind of furniture that has been in the same position for so long it has forgotten what it felt like to be elsewhere. "Sit down," he said. "Tell me everything." Olivia sat. She told him. Not everything. She had long since learned what her grandfather needed to know versus what he simply wanted to know. But she told him enough. The marriage, the shift, Andrew's ambition, and what it had done to him. Victoria, the conference room this morning. Charles listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "And now?" he asked. Olivia looked at him. "Now I think it's time to stop pretending." Charles Sterling studied his granddaughter's face, and then slowly, carefully, as if testing the weight of a smile he hadn't used in a while, he smiled. "I have been waiting," he said, 8 years to hear you say that." What Olivia did not know when she walked out of the Whitmore estate that morning was this. 3 weeks from that moment, everything Andrew Whitmore had built was going to pivot on a single decision. What Olivia did not know sitting across from her grandfather in his Midtown office was that the Sterling Legacy Group had spent the last 18 months quietly acquiring stakes in 3 financial networks that formed the hidden backbone of several major East Coast business partnerships. What she did not know was that one of those partnerships, a merger Andrew had been building toward for 2 years, the deal he intended to announce at the American Innovation Summit. The announcement that was supposed to make him untouchable was almost entirely dependent on funding structures that ran invisibly and indirectly through Sterling money. Charles Sterling had known this for months. He had said nothing, not because he was cruel, but because he was patient, and because he had been waiting for his granddaughter to come home. He reached into the folder on the table beside his chair and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He placed it on the table between them. Olivia looked at it. It was a financial overview, dense, technical, but she had grown up reading documents like this, the way other children grew up reading picture books. She read it. She looked up. "This is Andrew's merger," she said. "Yes." "And this," she pointed to a column of figures on the left side of the page. "This is us." "Yes." Olivia looked at the paper for a long moment. Then she looked at her grandfather. "You could have told me this before I signed this morning." "Yes," Charles said. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" He met her eyes. "Because I wanted you to choose to come home for your own reasons," he said. "Not because I gave you a weapon." The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, New York moved with its usual relentless energy horns, sirens, the low, constant roar of the city that never quite stops moving. Olivia looked back at the paper. "The Innovation Summit," she said. "When is it?" 3 weeks, her grandfather said. "Who knows I'm here? Marcus, my attorney, no one else." Olivia nodded slowly. In her mind, she was doing something she had always been good at, and had spent 8 years trying not to be good at. She was calculating. She was seeing the board. She was understanding with a clarity that felt almost physical exactly what the next 3 weeks needed to look like, and exactly what would happen at the end of them. She set the paper down. "Grandpa," she said. "Yes, I'm going to need a dress." Charles Sterling looked at his granddaughter for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a real laugh, full genuine, the laugh of a man who has just confirmed something he already knew. "I'll have 3 sent over by morning," he said. In Greenwich, Connecticut, that same evening, Eleanor Whitmore poured herself a glass of wine and stood in the sitting room of the estate, looking out at the darkened garden. Andrew was on the phone with Victoria. She could hear the murmur of his voice from down the hall, warm, relaxed, the voice of a man who felt that things had been put right. Eleanor sipped her wine. She thought about the conference room. She thought about Olivia sitting across that table, so still, so quiet, signing those documents with a steadiness that Eleanor had interpreted at the time as defeat. But now standing in the dark with her wine in the silence of a house that had never quite warmed to her, despite 40 years of her occupying it, Eleanor felt something she didn't enjoy feeling. She felt uncertain. She had expected Olivia to break. She had planned for it. She had prepared for tears, for argument, for the kind of drawn-out, exhausting dissolution that made family attorneys charge double. But Olivia hadn't broken. She had simply left. And that stillness, that complete, collected, almost regal stillness, nagged at Eleanor like a splinter she couldn't find the edge of. She had always told herself that Olivia was ordinary. She had built 8 years of certainty on that belief. But certainty, she was old enough to know, was a thing that could be wrong. She finished her wine. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Then she went to bed. And somewhere across the city, in a midtown building on the 27th floor, Olivia Sterling sat at a desk that had once been her grandmother's and opened a laptop and began to read every document she would need to understand before the American Innovation Summit. She read until 2 in the morning. She did not feel tired. She felt for the first time in 8 years completely awake. The weeks that followed were not dramatic from the outside. Nobody in Andrew Whitmore's world noticed anything changing. Andrew prepared for the summit. His PR team drafted announcements. His communications director coordinated press invitations. Victoria attended planning dinners and was charming and said all the right things. Eleanor hosted a small luncheon for the wives of Andrew's business partners and mentioned when asked that Andrew's first marriage had quietly concluded, which was the phrase she used because it implied that the quiet had been mutual and dignified, which was the version she preferred. From the outside, the Whitmore world continued exactly as it had been, polished, forward-moving, confident. But inside the Sterling Legacy Group, things were being arranged. Olivia worked 16 hours a day. She read. She called attorneys. She sat with her grandfather's financial advisors for long sessions, during which she asked questions that the advisors experienced. Brilliant people found surprisingly precise, coming from a woman who had, as far as they knew, spent the last 8 years as a housewife. One of the advisors, a woman named Patricia Lowe, who had worked for the Sterlings for 20 years, mentioned this to Charles after a particularly intensive session. "Your granddaughter," Patricia said carefully, "is either very prepared or very gifted." "Both," Charles said without looking up from his papers. Patricia considered this. "Should I ask how she learned to read a balance sheet like that?" "She grew up reading them," Charles said. "She just spent some time pretending she hadn't." Patricia went back to her office and sat at her desk for a moment. Then she thought about what it must have cost Olivia to do that, to be that capable, that informed, and to choose for 8 years not to show it, and felt something she didn't often feel in this line of work: respect. 11 days before the summit, Olivia found what she had been looking for. She was in the middle of reviewing the financial architecture of Andrew's merger, the deal he had called the defining achievement of his career, when she noticed something. A gap, small on the surface, easy to miss if you were reading quickly or weren't looking for it. But it was there. A funding structure that had been presented to Andrew's board as stable and independently sourced was in fact running through 3 intermediary accounts that all resolved ultimately to Sterling-controlled liquidity networks. Andrew's merger wasn't just dependent on Sterling money, it was built on Sterling money, and nobody had told him. Olivia sat back in her chair. She stared at the documents. She thought about Andrew standing in their kitchen, in the house she had helped make a home, 8 years of her life arranged around him, and the way he had smiled when Eleanor said she was never meant for this world. She thought about the pen moving across the divorce papers. She thought about Gerald Marsh's bored voice reading the settlement terms. She thought about the guest cottage, 60 days, no claim to anything. And then she thought about the employees of Whitmore Capital. Hundreds of people who had mortgages and children and retirement accounts, and none of whom had made the choices Andrew had made. She picked up her phone. She called Patricia. "I found it," she said. "How bad is it?" Olivia looked at the numbers. "If he announces this deal at the summit without understanding what's underneath it, and the structure becomes public, which it will, because structures like this always become public, his company doesn't survive the quarter." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" Olivia didn't answer right away. She had thought about this moment. She had thought about it the way you think about something when you're angry, when anger is the biggest feeling in the room, all the things you could do with it, the edges of it, the weight. But anger wasn't the biggest feeling in the room anymore. Something else was, something colder and more useful, something that looked from the inside a lot like clarity. "Set up the summit," she said. "We'll be there, and I want to talk to Grandpa's press contact tonight." "Are you sure?" "Yes," Olivia said, "but we're going to do this my way." She looked at the documents one more time. "We're not here to destroy him," she said. "We're here to show them what they missed." There was a pause on the line. Then Patricia Lowe, 20 years in finance, seen everything, said quietly, "All right, Miss Sterling, let's go to work." On the other side of the city, Andrew Whitmore was having dinner with Victoria Hale at a restaurant in Midtown and saying the words he had practiced, saying everything is in order, the announcement is ready, we're going to change the whole conversation in this industry. Victoria smiled and reached across the table and touched his hand. And Andrew felt certain. He felt, in fact, exactly as certain as a man feels in the minutes before the ground changes beneath his feet. He had no idea that 3 weeks after watching his ex-wife walk quietly out of a conference room, she was going to walk back into his life through an entirely different door. And nothing, not the estate in Greenwich, not Eleanor's careful plans, not Victoria's encouraging smile, was going to prepare him for who she turned out to be. 3 weeks had passed since Olivia walked out of the Whitmore estate. 3 weeks, and Andrew Whitmore had not thought about her once, or so he told himself. The truth which he buried under press meetings and dinner reservations and the comfortable warmth of Victoria's attention was that he thought about her more than he expected to. Not with longing, not with guilt exactly, with something closer to unease, the kind of unease a person feels when they've left a door open somewhere in the house but can't remember which room. He pushed the feeling down. There were more important things to focus on. The American Innovation Summit was 12 days away, and Andrew's team was operating at a level of intensity that made the office feel electric. His communications director, a fast-talking man named Derek Chu, had been averaging 4 hours of sleep a night for the past 2 weeks. His PR lead had sent 17 drafts of the announcement press release and was working on the 18th. Every detail was being managed, reviewed, and managed again. This was Andrew's moment. 2 years of building toward this partnership, this merger, this announcement, and it was finally here. The deal would position Whitmore Capital as one of the most significant players in East Coast finance. It would open doors that had always been technically available to him, but never quite opened all the way. It would earn him at last the kind of respect that his mother had always believed he deserved, but that the business world had been slow to confirm. He called Derek into his office on a Tuesday morning 10 days before the summit. "Tell me everything is perfect," Andrew said. Derek sat down and opened his tablet. "Funding confirmation is locked. Partners have signed the preliminary. Press invitations went out yesterday. We've got 17 confirmed media attendees, 6 of them television." "Good." "Security protocol is set for the private airfield arrival portion of the evening. We've got the usual guest list, about 200 all vetted." "Good." "One thing," Derek said, and his tone shifted just slightly, the way tones do when the thing being mentioned is not actually a small thing. Andrew looked at him. "We've had a late RSVP," Derek said, "from the Sterling Legacy Group." Andrew was quiet for a moment. I knew the name, the way everyone in his world knew the name. The Sterling family was the kind of institution that existed in the background of American finance, the way certain mountains exist in the background of a landscape. You don't think about them constantly, but they are always there, and their size is such that when they move, things shift. "They've never attended this summit before," Andrew said. "No," Derek agreed. "They haven't." "Did they say who's coming?" "A representative of the family. The RSVP came through their main attorney's office. No specific name." Andrew frowned at his desk for a moment. Then he shrugged. "Fine. Add them to the list. Sterling attending is good for us. It signals credibility." Derek nodded and left. Andrew turned back to his window. He did not think about the Sterling name again for 8 more days. He should have. Meanwhile, in the Sterling building on the 27th floor in Midtown, Olivia was on the phone with Patricia Lowe and not sleeping. It was 11:30 at night on day 4 of what they had internally begun calling the preparation window, and Olivia had a legal pad covered on both sides with notes, a coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago, and the particular focused energy of a woman who has spent 8 years keeping herself small and is done with it. "Walk me through the secondary accounts again," she said. Patricia's voice came through the phone with the tone of a woman who has been walking someone through the same documents for the fourth time and has not yet lost patience, which was its own kind of professionalism. The secondary accounts are held through two subsidiaries, one registered in Delaware, one in Nevada. On paper, they look independent. In practice, both route back through Sterling-controlled liquidity nodes. And Andrew's due diligence team didn't catch this. "They weren't looking for it," Patricia said. "And frankly, the way it's structured, you have to know what you're looking for. It's not hidden, it's just layered." Olivia tapped her pen against the legal pad. "How long before it becomes visible once the merger is announced? If someone is specifically looking, a month, maybe 6 weeks. If it surfaces organically, a journalist, a competitor, someone doing a deep background could be as little as 2 weeks. And when it surfaces," Patricia paused, "the deal looks like it was built on misrepresented funding. Andrew's board starts asking questions he can't answer. Partners get nervous. The whole structure becomes a liability instead of an asset." Olivia was quiet. "How many employees?" she asked. Patricia understood immediately what she was asking. Whitmore Capital directs staff about 340. Subsidiaries bring it to around 800. 800 people. 800 people who had nothing to do with Andrew's choices, or Eleanor's cruelty, or the pen thrown across a conference room table. "All right," Olivia said. "I want to be clear about something going into this summit." "Of course. We are not there to destroy him," she said. "We're there to show them what they missed, and to protect those employees. That's a harder path than the alternative." "I know," Olivia said. "That's why it's the right one." There was a brief silence. Then Patricia said, with the precision of someone filing a fact away permanently, "Understood, Miss Sterling." Olivia hung up and looked at the legal pad. She thought about 800 people who did not know that their company's future was sitting in the hands of a woman their employer had reduced to 60 days in a guest cottage and a small monthly stipend. She picked up her coffee, discovered it was cold, set it back down, and kept working. 7 days before the summit. Charles Sterling called Olivia into his office at 8 in the morning and handed her a cup of coffee before she could ask for one. This was a gesture of love from Charles. He remembered how people took their coffee, and he made sure it was ready, and he never made a production of it. He sat across from her and looked at her with the careful attention of a man reviewing a blueprint. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I've slept," she said. "How much?" "Enough." Charles made a sound that was not quite agreement. "I want to talk about the summit," he said. "Specifically how we enter." Olivia wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "I've been thinking about that." "So have I." He opened a folder on the table between them. "The timing of the announcement matters. Andrew plans to make his merger announcement at 9 in the evening. It's the centerpiece of the night. His investors will be there, his partners, press. And Eleanor," Olivia said. "And Eleanor," Charles confirmed with the tone of a man acknowledging a weather pattern he finds unpleasant but not surprising. "If we arrive before his announcement," Olivia said, "we give him a chance to process. He might try to manage it, pull us aside, make it private, control the narrative. And if we arrive after we have no leverage over the timing." Charles nodded slowly. "So we arrive during." Olivia looked at him. "During the announcement," she said slowly, testing the shape of it. "When everyone is already watching." "When everyone is already watching," Charles confirmed. The silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that exists between people who have known each other long enough to think through the same problem at the same pace without needing to narrate every step. "The jet," Olivia said finally. Charles smiled. "The jet," he agreed. 6 days before the summit, something happened that none of them had planned for. Victoria Hale called Andrew from a lunch in the city and mentioned in a tone so casual, it was clearly not casual, that she'd heard something interesting. "Someone told me," she said, "that the Sterling family might be attending the Innovation Summit." Andrew, who was sitting at his desk reviewing the final draft of his announcement remarks, felt a small twist of something in his chest. "Derek told me about that. Someone from the family, apparently." Victoria said. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said too quickly. "No, it's not a problem. You know how I know Marcus Webb, from the Sterling attorney's office." Andrew did not know how Victoria knew Marcus Webb, but he said sure. "He mentioned when I ran into him that the family has been unusually active lately, behind the scenes, meetings, reviews, that kind of thing." Sterling is always active, Andrew said. Right, Victoria said. Right. But she said it in the tone that means the opposite of right. Andrew put down his pen. Victoria, what are you actually saying? A pause. I'm saying I think you should have Derek look a little more carefully at who exactly is attending from the Sterling side. That's all. After they hung up, Andrew sat at his desk for a long moment. Then he called Derek. The Sterling RSVP, he said. Find out exactly who's coming. Derek called back 40 minutes later. Their attorney's office won't give a name, he said. Just says it's a family representative with full authority to act on behalf of the group. Full authority, Andrew repeated. That's what they said. Andrew tapped his finger on the desk. Full authority from the Sterling Legacy Group meant someone significant, not a mid-level associate, not a PR representative, someone the family trusted to speak for them at a major public event. He thought about the timing, the merger announcement, the press. He thought about Sterling attending being good for credibility. He had said that 8 days ago, and he had believed it. Now, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, he wasn't sure. Keep trying, he said. I want a name before the summit. He never got one. 4 days before the summit, Eleanor called Andrew to discuss the seating arrangement for their table. This was Eleanor's way of participating in things she engaged through logistics, through the concrete and manageable details of an event, because logistics gave her the feeling of control, even when control was actually somewhere else entirely. They talked through the table placement, the guest order, the press position. Then Eleanor said, "Have you heard anything more from Olivia?" Andrew was quiet for a half-second. "No. Why would I just want to make sure she's not going to do something foolish," Eleanor said. "Some women in her position try to make a scene afterward, show up somewhere unexpected." "She signed the papers, Mother," Andrew said. "She's gone." Eleanor was quiet. "Yes," she said. "She is." But she said it the same way Victoria had said right, with an edge underneath it that didn't match the surface. "You're both doing this," Andrew said, and there was a note of irritation in his voice that he didn't bother to hide. "You and Victoria, saying things that sound like you're not worried while clearly being worried. What do you know that I don't?" "Nothing," Eleanor said. "I just know that women like Olivia don't leave quietly unless they have a reason to." She didn't have a reason. She had 60 days in the guest cottage and a small stipend. "Those aren't conditions that give a person leverage, Mother." "No," Eleanor said. "They're not." But here was the thing Eleanor would think about later in the cold light of everything that came after. She had met Olivia Bennett on the day Andrew brought her home. She had assessed her immediately efficiently with the long practice of a woman who understood social architecture. She had catalogued Olivia's background, her manner, her wardrobe, her conversational references, and she had arrived at a verdict. Ordinary. She had been so certain. She had never once in 8 years questioned that verdict. She questioned it now, late at night in her room at the Greenwich estate, lying in the dark and listening to the silence of a house that had always been easier to manage than it was to love. She questioned it, and then she told herself she was being foolish, and then she questioned it again, and the cycle repeated until she fell into an uneasy sleep somewhere around 3 in the morning. 2 days before the summit. Olivia stood in a fitting room on the 32nd floor of a building in Midtown and looked at herself in a mirror. Her grandfather had sent 3 dresses as promised. She had worn none of them. She had chosen her own, a designer she had loved since she was 19 and had not been able to wear in 8 years because it was recognizable, and recognizable meant traceable, and traceable meant the whole careful architecture of ordinary life she had built for herself would have developed cracks. The dress was midnight blue, not flashy, the opposite of flashy. The kind of dress that requires nothing from the room because it is already complete. The kind of dress that people look at and understand without knowing exactly why, that the person wearing it is not someone to underestimate. A woman from the design team, young, nervous, clearly aware of who she was working for, made a small adjustment at the shoulder and stepped back. "It's perfect," the woman said quietly. Olivia looked at herself. She looked at the set of her jaw, the steadiness of her eyes, the posture that she had never entirely been able to suppress, even in her quietest years, because some things are trained too deeply to be unlearned. "Yes," she said, "it is." She thought about the last time she had dressed for something that mattered, her wedding. She had worn white, of course, in the traditional way. Andrew had cried when he saw her at the end of the aisle, and she had believed standing there that those tears were the most honest thing she would ever be given by another person. She had been wrong, but she had not been wrong to believe it then. That was the hardest part she had come to understand. The loving had been real. The beginning had been real. It was what came after the slow replacement of the real thing with the performance of it that had destroyed them. And that destruction had not been entirely Andrew's fault. She had hidden from him. Not maliciously, not strategically, but she had hidden, and the space that hiding created had been filled with Eleanor's influence and Andrew's ambition, and the gradual deadly comfort of a man who stopped being curious about his wife because he thought he already knew everything she had to offer. She had let it happen. She would not let it happen again. The woman from the design team asked if she needed anything else. "No," Olivia said. "Thank you." She changed back into her regular clothes and walked out into the hallway where Patricia was waiting, tablet in hand, moving already talking before Olivia reached her. "Summit timeline confirmed," Patricia said. "Doors open at 6:30, dinner at 7:30. Andrew's announcement is scheduled for 9. We need to be in the air by 8:15. "We'll be in the air by 8, Olivia said. Patricia looked at her. "Your grandfather says he wants to review the financial presentation one more time tonight. Tell him 7 o'clock. I'll bring dinner. He also says—" Patricia paused with the expression of someone relaying a message they find slightly baffling. "He says to tell you that he's proud of you." Olivia stopped walking. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Something moved across her face, not quite pain, not quite relief, something older and more complicated than either of those things. The expression of a woman who spent 8 years without hearing those particular words from someone who meant them, and is now hearing them again, and isn't entirely sure what to do with them. "Tell him," she said finally, "that I heard him." The night before the summit, Andrew Whitmore could not sleep. He lay in the bedroom of his midtown apartment, the one he had moved into after the separation, sleek and modern and perfect in every way, except that it didn't feel like anywhere at all, and stared at the ceiling. Victoria was asleep beside him. She slept the way people sleep when their conscience is clear deeply and quietly, with no apparent awareness of the ceiling. Andrew listened to her breathe and thought about nothing, and then thought about everything, and then, despite all effort to prevent it, thought about Olivia. He thought about the conference room. He had expected her to fight. I knew her well enough, or believed he did, to know that she was not a person who surrendered easily. She was quiet, yes, contained. But underneath that containment, there was a will he had sometimes admired and sometimes found inconvenient, and he had expected it to manifest in that conference room. Some version of it. A protest, a negotiation, something. She had simply signed and walked out. And in the 3 weeks since there had been nothing, no phone calls, no messages through attorneys, no reports from any of their mutual acquaintances that she had been seen somewhere significant or saying something that might signal her plans. Nothing. It should have felt like resolution. It felt like something unfinished. He turned onto his side. He closed his eyes. He told himself tomorrow was the most important day of his professional life, and he needed to sleep. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it was thin and restless, broken by a dream he couldn't remember when he woke. But that left him with a feeling he couldn't name. The feeling lasted all the way through his morning, through his briefing with Derek, through the car ride to the summit venue. He carried it with him like something in his coat pocket, small and dense and impossible to put down. By 7:30 on this evening of the American Innovation Summit, the event was everything Andrew's team had worked to make it. 200 guests, catered to a precision that communicated without saying, so that the host understood exactly what quality meant. The lighting was warm and specific, the kind of lighting that makes everyone look their best and feel slightly more significant than usual. Andrew moved through the room the way he had learned to move through rooms, with the forward momentum of a man who knows where he is going, and the attentiveness of a man who wants you to believe your presence specifically is what makes the evening worth having. He spoke to partners, he spoke to investors, he spoke to journalists carefully and with exactly the degree of revealing confidence he had rehearsed. Eleanor arrived at 7:45 and immediately began moving through the room on her own track, a satellite of Andrew's orbit reinforcing and amplifying wherever she touched down. Victoria stood at Andrew's side with the practiced ease of someone who understands the function she is serving and is comfortable with it. At 8:15, Derek appeared at Andrew's elbow. "The Sterling representative's car just arrived at the private entrance," he said quietly. Andrew looked at him. "Already we said 9 for VIP arrivals." "I know, they arrived early." Derek paused. "I still don't have a name." Andrew felt the thing in his coat pocket get heavier. "All right," he said. "Keep the announcement on schedule, 9 o'clock. "Of course." Derek hesitated. "Should I greet them?" "Send someone from the team," Andrew said. "Professional, no fuss." Derek nodded and disappeared back into the crowd. Andrew took a drink of his water and turned back to the investor he had been speaking with and picked up the conversation exactly where he had left it, because that was the skill he had spent years developing, the ability to be present in the room he was in, even when part of him was somewhere else. 9 o'clock arrived with the momentum of something that had been building for a very long time. The room gathered the way rooms gather when they sense that what is about to happen matters. 200 people drawn by invisible current toward the center of the space, toward the podium, where Andrew now stood, his notes in order, the press cameras at the back of the room, Eleanor visible in the front row, with an expression that contained everything she felt about this moment and showed none of it. Andrew began to speak. I was good at this. He had always been good at this. The voice, the pacing, the way of making every person in a room feel as though the thing being described was being described specifically for them. He talked about vision. He talked about the future of finance and the courage it took to build something that mattered in an industry that rewarded caution. He talked about the partnership, the merger, the 2 years of building this toward today. The room was with him. He could feel it, the particular quality of attention that means you have a room that the thread between you and 200 people is taut and engaged and holding. He had them. And then the sound started, a low vibration, distant at first, registering below conversation before it registered above it. Then closer, then impossible to ignore. Aircraft engines. Andrew paused, just for a half second. Barely noticeable. He kept speaking because the thing to do when something unexpected happens, mid-announcement, is to keep speaking, to not give the interruption the dignity of your attention. But the sound kept building. Heads began to turn toward the large windows. Outside, the lights of a landing aircraft became visible as the plane descended toward the private airfield adjacent to the summit venue. Luxury, unmistakably. The kind of aircraft that doesn't belong to someone who is attending an event as an afterthought. The sound reached its peak and then settled to a lower register as the jet taxied. The room's attention had fractured. Andrew kept speaking, but he could feel the thread thinning, the 200 people redistributing their focus between him and the windows. He finished his prepared remarks faster than planned, brought it to a clean close, and managed the applause with a smile that revealed nothing of what he was feeling. Then the doors at the far end of the room opened. The Sterling representative had arrived. The crowd shifted. Andrew watched from the podium as people turned, and then he saw the man first, Charles Sterling, 81 years old, and moving through a room, the way mountains move through geological time, slowly, and with the absolute confidence of something that cannot be stopped. And beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, wearing midnight blue, with her spine straight and her eyes steady, and an expression that was not triumphant, not angry, not anything Andrew had prepared himself to encounter, was Olivia. Andrew's mind went blank. Completely, absolutely blank. The way a screen goes blank when the power cuts, not gradual, not managed, just suddenly empty where a moment before there had been everything. He heard his own glass make a sound against the podium that he had not consciously chosen to make. He heard Eleanor somewhere in the front row make a sound that was not a word. He heard Victoria standing 3 feet to his left say very quietly, with all the color gone from her voice, "That's not possible." But it was. It was Olivia, walking across the room toward him. No, not toward him, not specifically just through the room, the way a person walks through a space that they understand that they are comfortable in, that they have perhaps always been more comfortable in than he had ever imagined. Beside her, Charles Sterling lifted his hand, and the room, 200 people, investors and press and partners, and all the architecture of Andrew's most important night, went quiet. "Good evening," Charles Sterling said, and his voice filled the space without effort. "I apologize for the late arrival. Allow me to introduce my granddaughter." He looked at Olivia. The room looked at Olivia. Andrew looked at Olivia. And Olivia looked directly at Andrew, not with hate, not with satisfaction, not with any of the emotions he might have found easier to hold, with a steadiness that felt like being seen by something very large and very clear. "My name is Olivia Sterling," she said. The room absorbed those 4 words the way a room absorbs something that changes the shape of everything previously said in it. Andrew heard his own heartbeat. He heard Eleanor's sharp intake of breath. He heard the almost imperceptible whir of press cameras adjusting. And in the silence of all the things he had never known about the woman he married, the woman he reduced to 60 days and a small stipend, the woman he watched his mother throw a pen at and said nothing, Andrew Whitmore finally understood what he had done. Not what he had lost, what he had done. There is a difference. Losing is passive. What Andrew had done was a long series of choices, each one small enough to rationalize each one, building on the last, until the accumulation of small cruelties and small cowardices added up to something that could not be rationalized at all. He stood at the podium of his most important night, and he had never felt smaller in his life. The silence in that room lasted exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds is not a long time. In most circumstances, 4 seconds is nothing. The gap between a question and an answer, the pause between one song ending and another beginning. But in a room of 200 people who have just had the architecture of everything they thought they understood, rearranged in a single sentence, 4 seconds is an eternity. Then the room broke. Not loudly, not with chaos. It broke the way expensive things break, quietly in precise lines, with the particular sound of something that had been under pressure for a long time, finally giving way. 200 people began talking at once in the low, urgent murmur of people who are trying to process something significant, while also performing composure, because composure was what rooms like this demanded, even when composure was the last thing anyone felt. Andrew had not moved from the podium. He was still standing there, one hand resting on the surface of it, his prepared remarks. Somewhere beneath that hand, the applause from his announcement, already ancient history, already belonging to a different version of this evening, that had dissolved the moment Olivia walked through those doors. He was looking at her. She was not looking at him anymore. She was speaking to a woman in a red dress, one of the summit's senior coordinators, with the easy confidence of someone who has been in rooms like this since before she was old enough to know that most people found them intimidating. The coordinator was nodding, visibly recalibrating in real time, the way people recalibrate when they suddenly understand that the person they had categorized as a +1 is actually the most significant person in the room. Andrew watched this happen. He watched a woman he had known for 11 years, dated for 2, married for 8, move through his most important professional event as though she had always belonged here more than he had. And the terrible thing, the thing that would stay with him long after this evening, was that she had. She had always belonged here. He just hadn't known it. Derek appeared at his elbow again, and this time his voice had lost its professional neutrality entirely. "Andrew," he said, she's... "I know who she is," Andrew said. His own voice surprised him. It was steady. He didn't know how it was steady, but it was. "Did you know?" Derek asked. "Before tonight, did you know she was—" "No," Andrew said. "I didn't know." Derek absorbed this. "What do you want to do?" Andrew watched Olivia laugh at something Charles Sterling said, a real laugh, unguarded, the laugh of a person who is exactly where they are supposed to be, and felt something shift in his chest that he couldn't categorize and didn't have time to examine. "Nothing right now," he said. "Don't do anything. Don't say anything." "The press?" "Nothing," Andrew said. "I need a minute." Derek understood enough to give him that minute and stepped back into the crowd. Andrew stepped down from the podium. He needed to find Eleanor. He found her near the bar, which was where Eleanor went when she needed to think, and didn't want anyone to know she needed to think, because standing near a bar gave a person a plausible reason for standing still. She had a glass of champagne in her hand, and she was not drinking it. She was watching Olivia. Her face was doing something Andrew had almost never seen his mother's face do. It was uncertain. The precision of Eleanor Whitmore's self-presentation, the calibrated expressions, the controlled responses, the absolute confidence that she understood every room she entered, had slipped just slightly, just enough. She looked like a woman who had made a calculation and was only now discovering the error. Andrew stopped beside her. "Mother," he said. "Don't," she said, not harshly, tiredly. "Did you know?" Eleanor finally took a sip of her champagne. "Of course I didn't know," she said. "If I had known, I would have—" She stopped. "Would have what?" Andrew asked. She didn't answer that. Because the answer, if she was honest, and Eleanor Whitmore, whatever her faults, had never been dishonest with herself in private, was that she would have treated Olivia differently, not out of warmth, out of calculation. And that answer was worse than the original mistake, because it revealed that the problem was never really about Olivia's worth. It was about whether Eleanor had been able to see it. She hadn't. And that failure of vision, standing here, watching Olivia Sterling accept the quiet deference of 200 important people with the ease of someone who had always deserved it, felt like the most expensive mistake Eleanor Whitmore had ever made. "What do we do?" Andrew asked. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "We don't panic," she said. "We go over there, we speak to her, we behave like the family we are." "And if she doesn't want to speak to us?" Eleanor looked at her son. "She will," she said, with the certainty of a woman who has observed Olivia for 8 years and understands even now, even in this one thing clearly. "She's not here to humiliate us. If she wanted to humiliate us, she would have done it before the announcement. She would have arrived first and let us spend the entire evening knowing." Andrew looked at Eleanor, and for the first time in a very long time, something passed between them that was not performance or strategy, but genuine, unfiltered feeling. The feeling of two people who have done something they cannot undo and are standing in the full weight of it. "Let's go," Andrew said. They crossed the room together, Andrew and Eleanor moving through the crowd that parted for them with the social instinct of people who understand, even without being told, that something significant is happening in this corner of the evening. Charles Sterling saw them coming. He said something quietly to Olivia, who turned. She looked at Andrew first, then Eleanor. Her expression was not what he expected. "I expected coldness." He had prepared himself for coldness. It was the thing he deserved, and he had braced for it the way you brace for a physical impact. But what her face showed was not cold. It was composed, yes, controlled. But underneath the control was something that looked less like hatred and more like a kind of exhausted clarity. The look of someone who has done a great deal of emotional work to get to this moment and has arrived at something that is not quite peace, but is at least no longer war. Andrew stopped in front of her. "Olivia," he said. "Andrew," she said. "The simplicity of it. 8 years and the simplicity of it." "I didn't know," he said. He heard how inadequate it was as he said it. He said it anyway because it was true, and it was the only place he had to begin. "I know you didn't," she said. He looked at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" She met his eyes directly, and there was something in her gaze that was like looking into a room that is much larger than you expected, that goes back further than the walls should allow. "Because I needed to know what you were without knowing it," she said. "And I got my answer." The honesty of it landed without cruelty, which was somehow more devastating than cruelty would have been. Eleanor stepped forward. She opened her mouth, and then she did something that none of the people observing this exchange from a careful distance would have predicted. Eleanor Whitmore, who had spent 8 years reducing Olivia to a problem to be managed, who had thrown a pen across a conference table and said the words, "You were never anything," that woman pressed her lips together and looked at Olivia Sterling and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would make it smaller than it was. And Eleanor, who had always known how to use words as instruments of power, recognized in this moment that the only honest response was silence. Olivia looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm not here to make this night about any of that." She looked between them. "But I do need to speak with you both," she said. "Not here, not in front of the press, after the event privately." Andrew nodded. Eleanor nodded. And then Charles Sterling touched Olivia's arm gently, and they turned together toward a group of guests who had been waiting with the patient eagerness of people who understand that the person they want to speak to has more important things to finish first. Andrew stood and watched her go. Victoria appeared at his side. He had almost forgotten about Victoria. "Are you all right?" she asked. Her voice was careful in the way of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. "No," he said, because he was done for the moment with saying things that weren't true. "I'm not." Victoria looked at where Olivia was now standing, surrounded by a cluster of people who were listening to her with the full-body attention that the industry reserved for people who genuinely held the room. "She's remarkable," Victoria said quietly. "Yes," Andrew said. "You didn't know." "No." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said with a kind of honesty that Andrew would later remember as one of the most decent things she had ever done. "I'm sorry. I pushed for the divorce. I pushed for it faster than I'm sorry." Andrew looked at her. He didn't answer, because the truth was complicated in a way that the word sorry couldn't carry, and he was too emptied out right now to try to carry it. At 9:45, the formal portion of the evening concluded, and the room shifted into the looser social configuration of a gathering that has done its business and is now deciding what kind of ending it wants to have. Andrew had managed the remaining hour of formal proceedings on autopilot, the trained public face of a man who understood that collapsing in public was not an option, regardless of what was happening behind the face. He had answered questions from press about the merger announcement with the phrases he had prepared, and the composure he had built, and the press had written their notes and asked their follow-ups, and none of them had yet connected what they had seen at 9 o'clock, the arrival of the Sterling granddaughter, to the financial architecture of what Andrew had just announced. That connection was coming. Andrew knew it was coming. He did not yet know exactly how it was going to arrive. At 10:15, a man named Robert Chen from Whitmore Capital's financial oversight team found Andrew near the edge of the room and leaned in close. "We need to talk about something," Robert said. His voice had the particular quality of someone delivering bad news who has decided that the fastest delivery is the kindest. Andrew looked at him. Tonight. Andrew followed him into a side room off the main hall, a small meeting space empty used for exactly this kind of pulled-aside conversation. Robert opened his tablet. "I've been doing a deeper review of the merger funding structure for the past 2 weeks," Robert said. "Standard procedure before a public announcement." "And," Robert turned the tablet toward him. "These 3 accounts," he said, pointing. "I flagged them 2 days ago but couldn't complete the trace before tonight. I just finished an hour ago during the event." Andrew looked at the tablet. He read, "I was not a man who frightened easily. He had built a career on the ability to look at difficult financial information and remain functional." But what he read in the next 60 seconds did something to his heart rate that he would not have been able to conceal if anyone had been watching his face closely enough. "This routes to Sterling," he said, quietly. "The way you say something when you hope saying it quietly makes it less true." "Yes," Robert said. "How deep?" "Deep enough that without it, the funding structure doesn't hold." Andrew put the tablet down on the table between them. He stood there. Outside the door, he could hear the low murmur of the event continuing, 200 people in the ordinary momentum of the evening, none of them knowing what was sitting in this side room. "Does anyone else know?" Andrew asked. "Not yet. I came to you first." Andrew looked at the door. He thought about Olivia on the other side of it, moving through his most important night with the ease of someone who understood every move on the board. She had known. She had known before she arrived. This was not an accident, arriving tonight with her grandfather during the announcement. This was not coincidence. This was a woman who had done her homework with a thoroughness that he should have known was possible, that he would have known was possible if he had ever taken the time to understand who she actually was. She hadn't come here to destroy him. She had said that. Earlier, when he and Eleanor had spoken to her, she had said, "I'm not here to make this night about any of that." But she had also said she needed to speak with them privately. And now he understood what that conversation was going to be about. He picked up his phone. He sent one message to Olivia. It said, "I need to speak with you now. I think I understand what you already know." He set the phone down and looked at Robert. "Say nothing to anyone," he said. "Not tonight. Give me until morning." Robert hesitated. "Andrew." "One night," Andrew said. "I need one conversation first." Robert looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "One night." Olivia's phone vibrated against her palm at 10:23. She was standing near the window in conversation with Patricia and one of the Sterling family's long-term investment partners, a woman named Helen Cho, who had worked in this industry for 30 years and who was currently telling Patricia something that was making Patricia write very fast on her tablet. Olivia glanced at the screen. She read Andrew's message. She didn't respond immediately. She finished her conversation with Helen, made the appropriate closing remarks, and then excused herself. She found her grandfather standing with a small group near the center of the room, his posture commanding even in the relaxed setting, the group around him, attentive in the way that people are attentive around someone whose opinion they genuinely want. She touched his arm. He looked at her. She showed him the phone. Charles Sterling read the message. He looked up. His expression did not change. "He found it," Olivia said quietly. His team found it, Charles corrected gently, which means it would have surfaced in 2 weeks without us doing a thing. I know. Does that change anything for you? Olivia looked across the room at the door to the side hallway where Andrew had disappeared 20 minutes ago and not yet reappeared from. No, she said. It doesn't change what I want to do. It just changes his posture going in. Charles considered this. He'll be more willing to listen now. Yes. Is that what you want, a man who listens because he's cornered? Olivia looked at her grandfather. I want the employees to be protected, she said. I want the company to survive. What Andrew is, what he's willing to do now, versus then, that's his to figure out. Charles studied her face for a moment. All right, he said. Go talk to him. She found him in the side room. He was sitting at the table, his jacket off his forearms on the table, looking at the tablet in front of him with the expression of a man taking inventory of a situation he cannot fully absorb. He looked up when she came in. She closed the door. She sat across from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Andrew said, How long have you known about the funding structure? 11 days, she said. He closed his eyes briefly. And you came tonight anyway, knowing that I was about to announce a merger that's sitting on our money. Yes. Why didn't you call the bank? Call your grandfather's attorneys? You could have pulled the funding quietly and let the whole thing collapse without ever showing your face. I know. Jobs depend on Whitmore Capital. Andrew stared at her. You came here to protect my employees, he said slowly, as though he was hearing the sentence in a language he was still translating. I came here to prevent a collapse that doesn't have to happen, she said. The company is viable. The structure underneath it is the problem. Fix the structure and the company survives. And what does fixing the structure look like? It looks like a restructuring, she said. New leadership for the merged entity. The board chooses who. Sterling participates as an investor, not a controller. The employees keep their jobs. The partners are renegotiated with full transparency about the funding architecture. Andrew was quiet. And me, he said. What does it look like for me? Olivia met his eyes. You step back from day-to-day operations, she said. You stay on the board, but you stop being the person in charge of a company that you've been building on a foundation you didn't fully understand. It was not cruel. The way she said it was not designed to wound. It was simply true stated with the directness of someone who has decided that clarity is the only remaining form of respect. Andrew looked at the tablet. He looked at his hands. He looked at the door. Behind it, 200 people were finishing their evening gathering coats, making plans for drinks elsewhere, doing the ordinary things people do at the end of important nights, without knowing that in this side room, the architecture of one of those nights was being completely rebuilt. I built this company, he said. And his voice was different now, smaller, the voice of a man without his public face, on the voice of someone who is tired. I know you did, Olivia said. It mattered to me. I know. I worked for it. Whatever I got wrong, and I know what I got wrong, Olivia. I know it standing here right now. More than I have known anything in a long time, I worked for this. And it will survive, she said. That's why I'm here, not to take it from you, to make sure it survives. Andrew looked at her, and something in his face shifted. Not dramatically. Not with the theatrical collapse of a man having a cinematic moment of realization. Something quieter and slower and more real than that. The shift of someone letting go of a version of themselves they had been holding on to very tightly, not because it was right, but because it was familiar. I want to talk to the board, he said finally. Before I sign anything, I want to talk to them myself. That's fair, Olivia said. And I want... He stopped. What? He looked at the table. I want to tell you something, he said. She waited. I knew somewhere I didn't know what you were, what your name was, any of that. But I knew you were more than what I told myself you were. I knew it, and I let my mother's voice get louder than what I actually knew. And that is... He stopped again, started again. That is the thing I'm most ashamed of. Not the divorce, not the settlement. That. The fact that I knew and I let it be overwritten. The room was quiet. Olivia looked at him for a long time. Thank you for saying that, she said. Not I forgive you, not it's all right. Not any of the things that would have made him feel better faster. Just thank you for saying that, because she was not in the business of making things easier than they were, and Andrew, hearing it, understood that and nodded. Outside the side room, Eleanor was standing in the hallway. She had been there for 6 minutes. She had not intended to be there. She had been looking for Andrew, had followed the direction she had seen him walk, and had arrived at the door of the side room at a moment when the conversation inside was audible enough to understand. She had heard enough. She had heard Olivia say 800 people. She had heard her say the company is viable. She had heard Andrew say, I let my mother's voice get louder than what I actually knew. She stood in the hallway with her champagne glass long empty, and she did something that Eleanor Whitmore almost never did. She stood still and let herself feel something without immediately organizing it. What she felt was not exactly guilt. It was older than guilt and more complicated. It was the feeling of a woman who has lived a long time inside a version of the world she constructed with great care and is now seeing from the outside what that construction actually cost. She had looked at Olivia Young Quiet from a background Eleanor had judged as limited, and she had decided what she was. She had decided, and she had reinforced that decision for 8 years, and she had made sure Andrew reinforced it too, in the subtle and constant way that people who love us shape what we're willing to see. And she had been wrong. Not partially wrong. Wrong in the way that matters most wrong about who a person fundamentally was wrong in the judgment that had sat at the center of 8 years of a family's life, like a bad foundation under a house. The door opened. Olivia stepped out. She saw Eleanor. She stopped. They looked at each other in the hallway. Eleanor opened her mouth. I heard, she said. Her voice was different, quieter. The instrument she used for Room's precise projected controlled set aside. I didn't mean to. I was looking for Andrew. I know, Olivia said. I want to. Eleanor stopped. Started again. The starting again, the effort of it that was real. Eleanor didn't have to try for much. The trying was visible. I want to say that I was wrong about you. Olivia looked at her. Not because of your name, Eleanor said. Not because of the money or the family or any of that. I was wrong about you, the person. I decided what you were before I looked, and I kept deciding it every time you showed me something that should have changed my mind. Yes, Olivia said simply. I don't expect... Eleanor paused. I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed to say it. The hallway was quiet. Olivia looked at this woman who had made so much of the last 8 years harder, who had been the voice in Andrew's ear that said ordinary, who had pushed the pen across the table and pushed Olivia toward the door, and she felt something that she had not expected to feel. Not warmth, not forgiveness, not yet maybe not for a long time, but recognition. The recognition of a woman looking at another woman and seeing underneath all the armor and the cruelty and the decades of careful self-construction. Someone who had also been trying in their own wrong way to protect someone they loved. I didn't come here to be apologized to, Olivia said. I came here because something needed to be fixed, and I'm in a position to fix it. I know, Eleanor said. But Olivia said, I heard what you said, and I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't matter. It does. Eleanor looked at her, and for the first time in 8 years in a hallway outside a side room at a business summit that had already rewritten itself 3 times tonight. Eleanor Whitmore looked at Olivia Sterling and saw her, just her, without the verdict. She looked like a woman who was carrying a great deal, and carrying it with grace, and Eleanor, who had spent 8 years trying to tell the world that grace was something you were born into, understood in this moment that she had been wrong about that too. I'll be at the meeting with the board, Eleanor said. Whatever you need. Olivia nodded. She walked back toward the main room. Eleanor stood in the hallway for another minute. Then she set her empty champagne glass on a table and followed. The evening ended at midnight. The guests dispersed. The press filed out with their notes and their photographs and their questions that would become articles that would change the way the industry understood this night. The catering staff began the quiet work of returning a room to its ordinary state. Charles Sterling found Olivia near the exit and stood beside her for a moment, watching the last guests leave. Well, he said. Well, she agreed. How do you feel? She thought about the question. She thought about Andrew in the side room with his jacket off and his voice stripped down to something real. She thought about Eleanor in the hallway trying. She thought about 800 people who still had jobs because she had decided that clarity was not the same as cruelty. Like something ended, she said, and something else is starting. Charles put his hand on her shoulder. Are you afraid of what's starting? Olivia looked at the room that had been full and was now emptying the room that had held her most important night and was now returning to being just a room. No, she said, and she meant it. Not because she was certain of what came next. She wasn't. The board meeting would be complicated. The restructuring would be long and demanding and require the kind of sustained effort that didn't come with a dramatic arrival scene to carry it forward. There would be lawyers and documents and difficult conversations with people who hadn't been in this room tonight and would need to be brought up to speed on a reality they hadn't known existed. There was a great deal of work ahead. But for the first time in 8 years, Olivia Sterling was doing it as herself, not as the quiet wife, not as the woman from the bookstore, not as the settlement recipient with 60 days in the guest cottage and a small monthly stipend, as herself, as the woman she had always been in the life she had always had finally done with the effort of pretending otherwise. Charles Sterling put his arm around his granddaughter's shoulders. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." They walked out together. The jet was waiting. The morning after the summit arrived, the way mornings do after nights that have changed everything ordinary on the surface, with the same light through the same windows, the same sounds of a city that didn't know or care what had happened in a side room at 10:15 the previous evening. But underneath that surface, for the people who had been in that room, nothing was the same. And everyone who had been in that room knew it. Andrew Whitmore was awake at 5:30. He had not slept more than 2 hours. He had lain in the dark of his midtown apartment while Victoria slept beside him, and he had done what he always did. When something was too large to process, he had broken it into parts and examined each part separately, trying to find the edge of it, the place where it became manageable. He had not found that place. At 5:45, he got up, made coffee, and sat at his kitchen table with his phone in front of him and Robert Chen's tablet data open on his laptop. He read it again. The third time changed nothing about the numbers. Numbers don't change because you look at them again. But the third reading did something the first two hadn't. It made the numbers feel permanent. Real in the way that things become real when you stop hoping you misread them. The merger, the deal he had announced 12 hours ago to 200 people and a press contingent that was already running pieces this morning, was built on a financial foundation he had not known belonged to his ex-wife's family. He picked up his phone. He called Robert. Robert answered on the second ring, which told Andrew that Robert had also not slept. "What are we looking at in terms of timeline?" Andrew asked. No preamble. There was no time for preamble now. If the press pulls the thread, and someone will pull it, the financial journalists in that room last night are not slow. "We have maybe 10 days before the funding architecture becomes public knowledge," Robert said. "Possibly less. And if it becomes public before we restructure, then we're not managing the narrative. The narrative manages us." Andrew stared at his coffee. "She offered a restructuring," he said. A pause. "Olivia Sterling offered a restructuring," Robert said slowly, making sure he understood correctly. "Yes, last night. Board chooses new leadership for the merged entity. Sterling participates as investor. The company survives. Employees keep their jobs." Robert was quiet for a moment. Then, "What does she want in return?" "I step back from day-to-day operations." Another pause. Longer. "Andrew," Robert said carefully, "that's objectively speaking, that's a better outcome than this company deserves given what we didn't know." "I know," Andrew said. "She could have let it collapse." "I know. She could have called 3 journalists last night and by morning—" "Robert," Andrew said, "I know." The word landed with the weight of a man who has spent 5 hours alone in the dark, understanding exactly what he had been given and exactly what it cost. "Call the board," Andrew said. "I want an emergency meeting this afternoon, 2 o'clock, everyone." "That's fast." "Yes," Andrew said. "It is. Make it happen." He hung up and looked at his coffee. Then he looked at his phone. "I had one more call to make, and it was the one he had been sitting in front of for the past hour without making, because some calls require more than readiness. They require a specific kind of courage that has nothing to do with boardrooms or announcements or public faces." He called Eleanor. She answered immediately. "I've been waiting," she said. "I'm calling the board for 2 o'clock, he said. "I need you there." "I'll be there." A pause. "Mother," he said. "Yes. Last night in the hallway. What you said to her." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I said what needed to be said," she said. "Whatever good it does." "It mattered," Andrew said. "I think it mattered to her." Another silence. "I want you to know," Eleanor said, and her voice had the careful quality of someone choosing words that cannot be taken back, "that I understand now what I did. Not just to her, to you, I made you see her the way I saw her, and I was wrong, and She stopped. Andrew waited. I'm sorry, Eleanor said. It was the plainest thing Eleanor Whitmore had said in years. No qualification, no context, just the two words. Andrew closed his eyes. I know, Mother, he said. At 8:15 that same morning, Olivia was already at her desk on the 27th floor. She had slept 4 hours, which was more than she expected. She had arrived back at the building at 2 in the morning, changed out of the midnight blue dress, made tea, and sat at her grandmother's desk for 40 minutes doing nothing, just sitting, letting the evening settle, not processing it, not organizing it, just letting it exist in the room with her before she decided what to do next. Then she had slept. Then she had woken at 6:30 with the particular sharpness of someone whose mind had done its work overnight and was already moving before the rest of them had caught up. Patricia arrived at 8. She walked in without knocking, which was a privilege she had earned over 20 years and exercised without ceremony. She had 2 coffees, a tablet, and the expression of a woman who had also been working since early morning. The press pieces have started, she said, setting a coffee in front of Olivia. Olivia looked up. How many? About 14 so far. 3 major financial publications. The rest are secondary business blogs, industry aggregators. Patricia set the tablet on the desk, turned toward Olivia. The tone is what we expected. A lot of focus on the Sterling arrival. Several pieces are specifically trying to connect the merger announcement to Sterling's financial involvement. How close are they? 2 of the 3 major pieces are asking the right questions. They don't have the answers yet. How long? Patricia picked up her coffee. My read 48 hours before someone publishes a piece that's accurate enough to matter. Olivia nodded. Then we don't have time for a long negotiation, she said. The board meeting needs to happen today. Patricia looked at her. Has Andrew reached out? Not yet. Olivia's phone buzzed on the desk. She looked at it. And now he has. The message from Andrew said board meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I'd like you and your representative present if that's possible. Olivia read it twice. She noticed that he had said your representative, not your attorney or your grandfather's people. He had said representative, as though he was acknowledging without saying it directly that she was the one with authority here. She typed back, "We'll be there." She set the phone down and looked at Patricia. "Get Charles," she said, "and call our attorney. We need 2 hours to prepare before we walk into that room." The Sterling family attorney was a man named William Park, 62 years old, with the particular deliberateness of someone who has spent 4 decades being the most careful person in very high-stakes rooms. He arrived at the 27th floor at 9:15 and settled into the chair across from Olivia with the unhurried attention of someone who has been doing this long enough to know that rushing is how mistakes happen. Charles sat to Olivia's left. For 45 minutes, they reviewed the restructuring terms that Olivia had spent 11 days building. William asked questions with surgical precision, identifying the points of potential resistance before they arrived at them, testing the logic of each term, the way a structural engineer tests a bridge before anyone walks across it. At one point, he looked up from the documents and said, "You've thought about this more carefully than most people think about anything." Olivia looked at him. 800 jobs, she said. William looked back down at the documents. Right, he said, and kept reading. At 10:30, he set the papers down. The terms are fair, he said, unusually fair given your position. My position is not about being unfair, Olivia said. I understand that, William said. I want to make sure you understand that if you wanted to, you could be. I know. The board will know that too, he said. They'll know they're getting a better deal than they could reasonably expect, and some of them will find that suspicious. Let them find it suspicious, Olivia said. The terms speak for themselves. William nodded slowly. There's one element that concerns me. The leadership transition, Olivia said. It was not a question. The board choosing new leadership is the right structure, William said, but they're going to want clarity on what that means for Andrew in practice. Is he on the board? Does he vote? What's his role? He stays on the board, Olivia said. He votes. He has a voice. He just doesn't have day-to-day operational control over a company that was built on a foundation he didn't fully understand. And if he contests that, he won't, she said. William looked at her. Charles spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. She's right, he said simply. He won't. William gathered his papers. All right, he said. 2 o'clock. The Whitmore Capital boardroom was on the 41st floor of a building in Midtown, 12 blocks from the Sterling office. Olivia arrived at 1:55 with Charles Patricia and William Park. The receptionist at the front desk looked at them with the particular expression of someone who has been briefed that important people are arriving but was not prepared for quite how much the room was going to shift when they walked in. She showed them to the boardroom. 8 people were already seated when they entered. Andrew sat at the head of the table. He had changed from the night before, different suit, same face, except that the face was different too, in a way that was hard to name but visible. The public face was gone. What was underneath it was not raw exactly, but unguarded. The face of someone who has decided that the version of themselves they perform for rooms is not what this particular room requires. Eleanor sat to his right. She was dressed in dark blue, and her posture was as straight as ever, but something in her bearing had shifted. A degree of formality, released the way a fist that has been clenched for a very long time slowly opens. The 6 board members ranged around the table were a mix of expressions, cautious, curious, some of them visibly on guard in the way of people who have received an agenda that tells them something significant is happening without telling them exactly what. Andrew stood when Olivia entered. The gesture was small. It was not required by protocol or courtesy. He stood up because standing up was the honest thing to do, and he was trying today to be honest. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for the meeting," Olivia said. She sat across from him, William to her left, Charles to her right, Patricia at the end of the row with her tablet ready. Andrew looked around the table. "I'm going to be direct," he said to the board, rather than to Olivia, though she heard every word. "The merger announcement I made last night was built on a financial structure that I did not fully understand. Specifically, 3 funding accounts that form the backbone of the structure are controlled by the Sterling Legacy Group." The board absorbed this. A man named Frank DeLuca, who had been on the board for 11 years and had the institutional memory to know what a bombshell felt like when one landed, said carefully, "How long have you known this?" "Since last night," Andrew said. "My team flagged it during the event." Frank looked at Olivia. "Miss Sterling," he said. "The accounts were not hidden," Olivia said. "They were layered. Anyone doing a sufficiently thorough review would have found them." "But we didn't," Frank said. "No," she said. "You didn't." The room was quiet for a moment, in the way rooms are quiet when several people are simultaneously deciding how to proceed. Then Frank said, "What are you proposing?" Olivia looked at William, who slid a copy of the restructuring terms to each board member. While they read, Olivia watched their faces with the practiced attention of someone who has learned to read a room by the micro-expressions of its inhabitants. She watched Frank's frown deepen at the leadership transition paragraph, then ease slightly when he reached the employee protection clauses. She watched a woman named Sandra Okafor, the board's financial governance lead, read the investment participation terms 3 times, which meant she was finding something she hadn't expected and was trying to decide if it was a trap. It was not a trap. Sandra looked up. "Sterling participates as investor," she said, reading directly from the terms. "Non-controlling, advisory capacity only." "Correct," Olivia said. "You're putting money into a company that you could currently leverage into the ground," Sandra said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Olivia said. "Why?" The room waited. Olivia looked around the table at Frank's cautious face, at Sandra's assessing one, at the 4 other board members in various states of trying to process a situation that had no obvious precedent in their experience. Then she looked at Andrew. He was watching her with an expression she recognized from the early years, from the time before ambition calcified into certainty. The expression of a man who is genuinely curious, who genuinely wants to know the answer. "Because the company is viable," she said, "because 800 people did their jobs well and deserve a company that can continue, and because the right thing to do with a position of power is not always to use it." The silence that followed was different from the silences earlier in the meeting. It was the silence of people recalibrating not just their understanding of the situation, but their understanding of the person sitting across from them. Frank set his copy of the terms down on the table. "I have one question about the leadership transition," he said. "Go ahead," Olivia said. "Who do you have in mind?" "That's your decision," she said. "Not mine." Frank looked at Andrew. Andrew looked back at him. "We have internal candidates," Andrew said. "I'd recommend the board convene a separate session on that question without—" He paused. "Without me in the room, given the conflict of interest." Frank raised his eyebrows slightly. It was Olivia knew the most significant thing Andrew had said in the meeting. Not the acknowledgement of the funding structure, not the signing of the restructuring terms the voluntary removal of himself from a decision about his own succession. The choosing of process over ego. It was small, but small things done honestly meant something. Sandra exchanged a look with Frank. Frank looked at Olivia. "Give us 20 minutes," he said. Olivia, Charles, William, and Patricia stood and filed out into the hallway. Andrew started to stand. "Andrew," Frank said. Andrew stopped. "Stay," Frank said. "We may have questions." Andrew sat back down. Olivia was the last one through the door. As she stepped into the hallway and the door closed behind her, she heard Frank's voice begin low and deliberate on the other side. She did not try to hear what was being said. She walked to the window at the end of the hallway and looked out at the city. Patricia appeared at her elbow. "You all right?" Patricia asked. "Yes," Olivia said. "That went better than I expected," Patricia said. Sandra's interest in the non-controlling clause, she understood what it meant. "She's smart," Olivia said. "She'll make sure the others understand it too." Charles came to stand on her other side. The three of them stood at the window for a moment, looking out at Midtown, in the flat gray light of an October afternoon, a city that was doing what it always did, moving indifferent to any single story within it, magnificent in its collective indifference. Then Charles said, "Whatever they decide in there, you've already done the most important part." Olivia looked at him. "You showed up," he said. "Not to win, not to punish. You showed up to fix something. That's in my experience, in 60 years of watching people navigate situations like this, that is the rarest thing." Olivia looked back at the window. "You taught me that," she said. Charles was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandmother taught both of us." Olivia almost smiled. 23 minutes later, the boardroom door opened. Frank DeLuca stepped out. He looked at Olivia. "We'd like you to come back in," he said. They filed back in. Andrew was still at the head of the table. Eleanor had not moved. The 6 board members had the slightly rearranged posture of people who have been through something and come out the other side of it. Frank sat down. "We've reviewed the restructuring terms," he said. "The board is prepared to accept them with 2 modifications." William Park opened his notepad. "First," Frank said, "the transition period for new leadership. Your terms specify 60 days. We'd like 90. William looked at Olivia. She nodded. "Agreed," William said. "Second," Frank said, and here his voice shifted slightly, "we'd like Sterling's advisory capacity to include a seat at the quarterly governance review. Non-voting. Observer status." Olivia looked at William. William kept his face entirely neutral, which was how Olivia knew he thought this was a better outcome than he had expected. "Agreed," she said. Frank looked around the table. The board nodded. Frank looked at Andrew. Andrew looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up at Olivia across the room. "I want to be on record," he said, "as saying that I support this restructuring, fully, and that the terms offered by Miss Sterling they're more generous than this company has a right to expect." He said it to the room, but he said it to her. She heard it. Frank nodded. "Noted for the record." William slid the signature pages across the table. Andrew picked up a pen. He signed. The pen moved across the page without drama, without theater, without the weight that had accompanied Olivia's signature in a different conference room 3 weeks ago. Just a pen, just a page, just a man accepting the reality of what he had built and what it had cost and what it was going to take to rebuild it on ground that was actually solid. Frank signed, Sandra signed, the remaining board members signed in turn. William collected these pages with the efficiency of a man who has watched many rooms full of people sign many things and understands that the signing is not the end of anything, but the beginning of the actual work. Eleanor, who had sat through the entire meeting without speaking, said quietly, "What happens to the announcement, the press?" Olivia looked at her. "The press gets a statement today," she said. "The merger proceeds under the restructured terms. Sterling's involvement is disclosed fully. The company's leadership transition is announced as a planned development, not a crisis." "And the framing?" Eleanor asked. "The framing," Olivia said, "is that Whitmore Capital is a viable company that is taking proactive steps to build a stronger governance structure before moving forward with a significant merger," which is true. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "You're protecting the company's reputation," she said. I'm protecting 800 people's jobs, Olivia said. The company's reputation benefits from that, but that's not why I'm doing it. Eleanor nodded. She said nothing more. But something in her face, in the set of her jaw, in the stillness of her eyes, said something that her voice did not. It said, I understand now. The meeting ended at 3:45. In the elevator going down, Charles put his hand on Olivia's arm. There's one more thing, he said. She looked at him. Andrew asked me before you came back into the room, Charles said, if he could speak with you, privately. Not today when you're ready, if you're ever ready. Olivia watched the floor numbers count down. What did you tell him? I told him that was entirely up to you, Charles said, as it should be. The elevator doors opened. They walked through the lobby and out into the October afternoon. Olivia thought about Andrew asking her grandfather for permission to speak with her, not through an attorney, not through a formal channel, but person to person, in the way you ask for something, when you understand that you have no claim to it, and are hoping that the person you're asking might, out of their own generosity, say yes anyway. She thought about what she wanted. Not what she should want, not what made sense, not what the next chapter of the story was supposed to look like according to the version where everything resolved cleanly, what she actually wanted. She wanted the company to survive. She had that. She wanted the employees to keep their jobs. She was going to have that. She wanted to stop pretending. She had stopped. She wanted, and this was the part that was harder to name, that had no clear resolution. She wanted the 8 years to have meant something. Not the marriage necessarily, not the legal fact of it or the ending of it or the guest cottage and the 60 days. She wanted the years themselves, the real ones, the ones underneath the performance, to have been worth something. She was still working on that answer. She thought she might be working on it for a while. Tell him I'll think about it, she said to her grandfather. Charles nodded. They walked together toward the car. Patricia was already on the phone, moving into the next thing, the statement to the press, the coordination with William's office, the dozen practical pieces that had to be assembled before the day was over. The city moved around them, indifferent and magnificent. And Olivia Sterling walked through it as herself for the 3rd day in a row and found that it fit better each time. By 6 o'clock that evening, the press statement had been released. By 7, the 3 financial publications that had been asking the right questions had updated their pieces to reflect the restructuring announcement, and the tone of those pieces had shifted from the particular excitement of journalists who think they've found a crisis to the more measured register of journalists describing a significant but managed development. By 8, Derek Chu, still running on minimal sleep, still the most prepared person in any room he entered, had assembled a communications brief for the transition period and sent it to the board. By 9, Victoria Hale had called Andrew and said in a voice that was kind and careful and honest that she thought they should take some time apart. Andrew, who was sitting in his apartment with a glass of water and the quiet of a person who has done something very hard and is now on the other side of it, said, I think you're right. It was not the end of something. It was the acknowledgement of something that had already ended, and that acknowledgement was cleaner and more dignified than the alternative. After they hung up, Andrew sat in his apartment for a long time. I thought about Olivia saying I needed to know what you were without knowing it. He thought about what that meant in reverse, about what it meant to have known someone for 11 years and to have spent those years looking at a version of them that was only partial, that was filtered through a lens he had never examined closely enough to see its distortions. He thought about the bookstore in Cambridge, the Tuesday afternoon, the 40 minutes about books that became everything else. He had been in that moment genuinely curious. He had wanted to know her. He had just somewhere along the way decided he already did. He picked up his phone. He opened his messages. He looked at Olivia's name. He didn't type anything. He put the phone down. He looked at the window. He thought, I have a great deal of work to do. Not the work of restructuring. Not the board meetings and the governance reviews and the new leadership transition. Not any of the practical external work that the next 3 months were going to demand of him. The other work. The kind that doesn't have a meeting and doesn't produce a document and doesn't get filed with an attorney's office. The work of understanding how a person gets from genuinely curious to completely blind without noticing the journey. I thought it was going to take longer than 3 months. He thought that was probably right. He sat with that for a while. Outside his window, New York continued in its magnificent indifference, the 10,000 simultaneous stories of a city that never stops long enough to know you're in the middle of one. And Andrew Whitmore, for the first time in a very long time, let the indifference be a comfort rather than an insult. Let the enormity of everything beyond his walls put his particular story in its actual proportion, significant to the people inside it, invisible to the world outside, which was exactly as it should be. He drank his water. He went to bed. He did not sleep immediately, but when sleep came, it was the deep kind, the kind that comes after honest effort. He had not felt it in years. The restructuring took 93 days, not 90 as the board had requested. 93 because real work never fits neatly into the time allotted for it, and the people doing the work honestly were not willing to cut corners just to meet a deadline that looked clean on a calendar. Olivia knew this going in. She had told Patricia on the morning after the board meeting that they should plan for the process to take longer than anyone wanted it to and shorter than anyone feared. Patricia had written that down, which was what Patricia did with things she considered worth keeping. The 93 days were not quiet. They were, in fact, the most demanding 3 months of Olivia's professional life, and she had grown up watching her grandfather run one of the most complex private financial empires in America, which meant her baseline for demanding was already set considerably higher than most people's. There were 14 separate board sessions. There were 3 rounds of renegotiation with the merger partners, each one requiring Olivia or William Park, or both of them, to sit in a room with people who were simultaneously grateful for the restructuring and resentful of the circumstances that had made it necessary, which is a particular kind of difficult negotiation, because resentment and gratitude in the same person tend to come out sideways. There were conversations with the 800 employees, not one large announcement, but a series of smaller ones department by department, because Olivia had insisted on that. She had told the communications team that the people whose jobs were at stake deserved to hear the news in a room where they could ask questions, not in a company-wide email they read alone at their desks. The communications team had looked at each other when she said this. Then they had scheduled the sessions. The first one was on a Thursday morning in a conference room on the 14th floor of Whitmore Capital. 43 employees from the Financial Analysis Division. Olivia sat at the front of the room, not behind a podium, just in a chair, and she told them the truth, what had happened, what was changing, and what it meant for their jobs. A woman in the back row raised her hand. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands folded on the table in front of her were pressing against each other in the way hands do when someone is working hard to stay calm. Olivia looked at her directly. "Yes," she said. "That is the entire reason we are doing this the way we are doing it, to make sure the answer to that question is yes." The woman nodded. She pressed her hands together for another moment. Then she exhaled. And something in the room shifted, the particular shift that happens when 43 people who have been holding their breath collectively let it go. Olivia thought about that exhale for a long time afterward. She thought about it on the drive back to the Sterling building. She thought about it late at night when the work was done, and she was sitting at her grandmother's desk in the quiet of the 27th floor. She thought about it the way you think about the thing that confirmed for you why you made the choice you made. 800 people. One exhale in a room of 43, and she understood all over again why the 93 days were worth every hour of them. 6 weeks into the restructuring, something happened that none of them had planned for. It started with a phone call to Patricia from a journalist named Cara Donovan, who wrote a long-form business column for one of the country's 3 most widely read financial publications. Cara Donovan was not the kind of journalist who wrote crisis pieces. She was the kind who wrote the pieces that came after the crisis, when the dust had settled enough to see the shape of what had actually happened. She was calling because she wanted to write about Olivia. Patricia brought it to Olivia on a Wednesday morning, the way Patricia brought everything efficiently, without editorial comment, presenting the information, and then waiting for Olivia to decide what to do with it. "She wants an interview," Patricia said. 30 minutes on the record. She says she's been following the restructuring and she has questions she can't answer from the public record. Olivia looked at the coffee in front of her. "What kind of questions?" She sent a preliminary list. Patricia slid a printed page across the desk. "The last one is the one you'll want to look at first." Olivia picked up the page. She read through the questions, standard, careful, the questions of someone who has done thorough research and is looking for the layer underneath the layer the research can reach. The last question was, you had the power to destroy Whitmore Capital. You chose not to. Why? Olivia set the page down. She was quiet for a moment. "Tell her yes," she said. Patricia raised an eyebrow slightly. "Are you sure Charles will want to—" "Tell her yes," Olivia said again. "And tell her I'd like to meet in person, not on the phone." Patricia made a note. "One condition," Olivia added. "Of course. She writes the piece she finds, not the piece she expects to find." Patricia looked at her. "I'll pass it along," she said with the tone of someone who recognizes that this condition is either very simple or very complicated and isn't yet sure which. It turned out to be both. Cara Donovan arrived at the Sterling building on a Tuesday afternoon, 7 weeks into the restructuring, with a recorder, a notepad, and the particular alert quality of a journalist who is already inside the piece before the interview begins. She was in her early 40s, precise in her movements with the kind of listening face that makes people say more than they plan to because it signals genuine interest rather than performed attention. They sat in a small conference room off the main office floor. No grand furniture, no views designed to impress. Olivia had chosen it deliberately. Cara set up her recorder. "I want to start somewhere that's not on the list I sent," she said. "All right," Olivia said. "The bookstore," Cara said. Olivia was quiet for a moment. She had not expected that. "You worked at a bookstore in Cambridge for almost 2 years before you met Andrew Whitmore," Cara said. "You had already walked away from the Sterling name. What was that like?" Olivia looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. "It was the first time in my life," she said, "that I walked into a room and nobody knew what I was worth before they knew my name." Cara wrote something. "And what did that feel like?" "Like breathing," Olivia said simply. Cara looked up from her notepad. "Like breathing," she repeated. "Yes." Cara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When did you know the marriage was over? Not legally, actually." Olivia considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I knew it was over," she said, "the day I realized Andrew had stopped being curious about me. Not angry, not disappointed, just finished being curious. Like he had decided he already knew everything I was, and what he knew was enough, but not significant." "What did you do?" "I kept making dinner," Olivia said. "I kept showing up, because part of me still believed that people could decide to be curious again. That curiosity wasn't something you either had or didn't. I thought it was something you could choose." "Was it?" "In some people," Olivia said. "Andrew chose it eventually, but only after he had to." Cara wrote that down. Then she looked up. "The last question on my list," she said. "Yes. You had the power to destroy Whitmore Capital. You chose not to. Why?" The room was very quiet. Olivia looked at the recorder. The small red light that meant the answer to this question was going to become permanent, was going to leave this room and travel wherever Cara Donovan's words traveled, which was very far. She thought about the 43 people in the room on the 14th floor, the woman with her hands pressed together, the exhale. She thought about her grandfather saying the rarest thing. She thought about Eleanor in the hallway trying. She thought about Andrew at a podium with his prepared remarks beneath his hand and his whole understanding of the evening dissolving around him. "Because I could," she said finally. Cara looked at her. "The ability to destroy something," Olivia said, "is not a reason to destroy it. It's just information. What you do with it, that's the choice. And the choice I made was that 800 people's lives were more important than the satisfaction of watching something fall." "Was there satisfaction?" Cara asked. "In any of it?" Olivia thought about this honestly. "There was clarity," she said. "That's different from satisfaction. Satisfaction is about winning. Clarity is about knowing. I didn't need Andrew Whitmore to lose. I needed to stop letting other people's definitions of me be the ones I lived inside." Cara set down her pen. "That's the piece," she said quietly. "Not as a journalist, as a person." Olivia looked at her. "Write what you found," she said. "Not what you expected." "I always do," Cara said. And the way she said it, Olivia believed her. The piece ran 4 weeks later on a Sunday, which is when that publication ran the stories it considered most important. It was 6,000 words. The headline was simple, "The Woman Who Could Have." It ran with a photograph taken in the Sterling Building's main conference room, Olivia, at a table not posed, just working her attention on the papers in front of her, the kind of photograph that captures someone being real, rather than performing being real. By noon on Sunday, the piece had been shared 40,000 times. By evening, it was the most read piece in the publication's online history for that month. Olivia did not read the comments. She had made this decision before the piece ran, and she held to it because she had learned long ago that what strangers thought about you was only relevant if you let it become the lens through which you saw yourself. And she was done, completely and permanently done, with letting other people's lenses be the ones she looked through. But she heard about the response. Patricia told her in the measured way. Patricia told her things that the publication's letters section had received more reader responses to this piece than to any piece in the past 3 years. That 3 major universities had contacted the Sterling office requesting that Olivia speak to their business school students. That 7 young women had written directly to the Sterling family's public email address to say that they had spent years making themselves smaller in their professional lives because they were afraid of what visibility would cost them, and that reading this piece had changed something. That last thing, the 7 letters, was the one that stayed with Olivia. She asked Patricia to send responses to all 7. Personal ones, not form letters. She drafted them herself at the desk that had been her grandmother's in the late evenings after the official work was done. 7 letters to 7 women she had never met, who had recognized something in her story that they recognized in their own. She told them what she had told Cara Donovan in different words, tailored to each person because the truth is the same, but the way it lands depends on the shape of the person receiving it. She told them the version of you that you've been hiding is the one worth knowing. 8 weeks after this piece ran, Charles Sterling called Olivia into his office and told her he was reducing his day-to-day involvement in the Sterling Legacy Group. She sat across from him in the leather chairs that had been in the same position for 40 years, and she listened to him say, with the directness of a man who has never had patience for softening what is simply true, that he was 81 years old, that he had been managing this operation for 6 decades, and that there was a person he trusted more than anyone else in the world to carry it forward. He looked at her when he said that. Olivia looked back at him. "You've been waiting for this," she said. 8 years, he said. "Give or take." She looked at her hands. She thought about the day she left. 24 years old, the weight of the Sterling name behind her, like something she was choosing to put down, walking into a bookstore in Cambridge and learning for the first time what it felt like to be simply a person in a room. She had needed that. She understood sitting here now that she had genuinely needed it, not as an escape but as a foundation. She could not have become who she was becoming without first knowing who she was, without the name. Without proving to herself in the quiet laboratory of an ordinary life that what was real in her was not the inheritance. It was her. "I'm not ready," she said. Charles looked at her. "I know," he said. "You'll be ready in about 6 months. But I wanted to say it now so you had time to get used to the idea." Olivia almost smiled. "You've been planning this conversation," she said. "Since you called me from the back of Marcus's car," he said. "Yes." She sat with that for a moment. The weight of it, the rightness of it, the particular feeling of something that has been moving toward you for a long time, finally arriving close enough to touch. 6 months, she said. 5 if you keep working the way you've been working, he said. But I'll say 6 so you don't overdo it. Olivia looked at her grandfather, this man who had built something extraordinary and held it together for 60 years, and was now with the clear-eyed practicality of someone who has always understood that stewardship is temporary choosing to hand it to the person he believed could carry it further. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the company. For everything the company represented, the years of waiting, the faith maintained through silence." The phone answered at midnight when she finally called. Charles nodded. He did not make it sentimental, because Charles Sterling did not make things sentimental. But his eyes for a moment were warm in the way that eyes are warm when something long hoped for has finally arrived. "Go back to work," he said. Olivia went back to work. 11 weeks after the board meeting, Andrew Whitmore called Olivia's office. Not her cell phone, the office line, which meant he had called the Sterling building's main number and asked to be connected, which meant he had chosen the formal channel deliberately, which meant he understood that he did not have the right to the informal one. Patricia took the call. She came to Olivia's door and said in her careful way, "Andrew Whitmore is on the line. He says he'd like 5 minutes if you're available." Olivia set down the document she was reading. She looked at the phone on her desk. She thought about the last time she had spoken to him in the boardroom across the table, the pen moving across the signature pages. She thought about what he had said for the record, that the terms were more generous than the company had a right to expect. She thought about her grandfather telling her that Andrew had asked before she came back into the boardroom if he could speak with her when she was ready. She thought about the 7 letters she had written to women who had spent years making themselves smaller. She thought about the bookstore. "Put him through," she said. A beat of silence. Then Andrew's voice. "Thank you for taking the call," he said. "You have 5 minutes," she said. Not unkindly, clearly. "I know." He paused. "I wanted to tell you something that I should have found a way to say in a room full of people, but couldn't figure out how." She waited. "I spent 11 years knowing you," he said. 2 years before we were married and 8 after. And I wasted the majority of those years operating on a version of you that I had constructed because the real version required more from me than I was willing to give." The office was very quiet. "The real version of you," he said, "required me to keep being curious, to keep asking, to not let my mother's voice or my ambition or my own comfort with the story I'd built decide what you were. And I didn't do that. I stopped. And everything that came after the distance, the blindness, the end of us started there." Olivia held the phone. She had not expected this to be what he said. She had expected something closer to a business conversation, a follow-up on the restructuring, a question about the transition, something practical that the personal framing was wrapped around. Not this. Not a man sitting somewhere stripped of every public surface, saying the thing he had actually worked out in the months since, and was now saying because it was true, rather than because it was useful. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about the 11 years, the good parts and the bad parts and the long middle portion that was neither just 2 people living alongside each other with a growing distance between them that neither of them named until it was too wide to cross. She thought about the bookstore, the 40 minutes about books that became everything else, the way he had cried at the end of the aisle, the way she had believed those tears. She thought about how belief and truth are not always the same thing, and how the heartbreak is not in being wrong to believe, but in the eventual understanding of where the belief ended and the performance began. "I know," she said finally. "That's not—" he started. "Andrew," she said. Her voice was not cold, not warm either, steady. "I know. I heard you. I understand what you're saying, and I believe you mean it." "But—" "There is no but," she said. Some things don't need a response that matches their weight. Sometimes the right response is 'I know,' and then both people move forward." A long silence. "Okay," he said quietly. "The company is going to be fine," she said. "The new leadership appointment, Frank called me yesterday, they're close to a decision. Patricia says the merger partners have responded well to the renegotiated terms." "I know," Andrew said. "Derek keeps me updated." "Good." Another silence, but different from the previous ones, lighter. "The bookstore," Andrew said. It came out almost without intention, the way things do when they've been sitting at the edge of a person's thinking for a long time and finally find the opening. Olivia waited. "I've been thinking about that Tuesday," he said. "The day I came in. You recommended a book for my sister." "I remember," she said. "What was it?" She paused. Then she said, "A collection of essays by a woman who had spent 20 years traveling alone and writing about what she found. I thought your sister would like it because you said she was restless and didn't know what to do with it." Andrew was quiet. "Did she like it?" Olivia asked. "She loved it," he said. "She still has it. She mentioned it to me a few months ago, actually." Olivia looked at the window. Outside November had arrived and was doing what November does in New York, stripping the last color from the trees, sharpening the air, making the city feel exposed in the particular way it gets when the insulation of summer is gone, and you can see the actual bones of things. "I'm glad," she said. And she was, genuinely simply glad. "Olivia," he said. "Yes." "Are you happy?" he asked. And his voice when he said it was not the voice of a man with an agenda or a follow-up or a particular answer he was hoping for. It was the voice of someone asking a question because they actually want to know the answer and have no right to expect one but are asking anyway. She thought about the question. She thought about the 27th floor and her grandmother's desk and Patricia coming in every morning with 2 coffees. She thought about Charles saying go back to work and meaning it as the highest form of faith. She thought about the 43 people in the conference room and the woman's hands and the exhale. She thought about 7 letters to 7 women. She thought about the midnight blue dress and walking into a room as herself for the first time in 8 years and finding that the room was large enough for who she actually was. "Yes," she said. She meant it. "Good," Andrew said. And there was something in his voice that was not envy, not regret, but the particular quality of a person who is genuinely glad for someone else, even when that gladness costs them something. "I'm glad." They said goodbye. She set the phone down. She sat at her grandmother's desk for a moment in the quiet of the office, the city outside doing its ordinary, magnificent, indifferent thing, and she held the conversation in her mind, the way you hold something you want to remember, not tightly, not possessively, just with enough attention to know it was there, to know it happened to know it meant something real, even if you weren't sure yet exactly what. Then she picked up the document she had set down. She went back to work. The formal leadership transition at Whitmore Capital was announced on a Thursday morning in early December, 93 days after the board meeting in Midtown. The new CEO was Sandra Okafor, the board's financial governance lead, who had read the restructuring terms 3 times in that first board meeting and had understood them more completely than anyone else in the room. She was 54 years old, precise and principled, and constitutionally incapable of cutting corners, which were exactly the qualities the company needed in the person running it. Andrew Whitmore remained on the board. The announcement was covered by the same financial publications that had covered the summit. The framing was what Olivia had said it would be: a company taking proactive steps towards stronger governance before a significant merger. Not a crisis, a correction, a choice. Sandra called Olivia the morning after the announcement. "I wanted to thank you," Sandra said. "Thank the board," Olivia said. "They made the right call." "They made the right call because you gave them terms that made the right call possible," Sandra said. "That's not the same thing." Olivia listened. "I've been in this industry for 30 years, Sandra said. "I have never seen someone in your position do what you did. I've seen people with that kind of leverage use it exactly the way you could have used it and didn't." 800 people, Olivia said. "I know," Sandra said. "And I want you to know that those 800 people, they don't know your name. In most cases, they don't know what happened at the level we do, but they are here today because of what you chose." Olivia held the phone. She thought about the woman with her hands pressed together. She thought about the exhale. "Make the company worth it," Olivia said. "I intend to," Sandra said. In the first week of January, 4 months after the summit and 2 months after the board meeting, Cara Donovan published a follow-up piece. It was shorter than the first, 800 words, a postscript to the original 6,000-word piece that had traveled as far as it had traveled. The piece was about what happened after. After the restructuring, after the transition, after the woman who could have chose not to, and the machinery of consequence and repair began its slow, real, unglamorous work of making things right. Cara had asked Olivia one final question for the follow-up. She had sent it by email because she understood by now how Olivia preferred to work directly without ceremony in the channel most suited to the task. The question was, what did you learn about yourself through all of this? Olivia read the question 3 times. She typed her answer at the desk that had been her grandmother's in the early morning before Patricia arrived, and the day's work began in the particular quiet that belongs to people who start early because they love what they are doing. She wrote, "I learned that silence is not the same as surrender, that walking away from a room without fighting is sometimes the most powerful move available, and I learned that who you are does not require anyone else's recognition to be real. It is real whether they see it or not. The work is not convincing them. The work is knowing it yourself." She read it back. She sent it. She closed her laptop. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window at January in New York, cold clear, the city stripped to its bones and beautiful for it. And Olivia Sterling, who had walked out of a conference room in Greenwich, Connecticut, with a small stipend and 60 days in a guest cottage and a pen thrown at her face and a husband who looked away. Olivia Sterling, who had called her grandfather from the back of a car and said, "I'm ready." Olivia Sterling, who had put on a midnight blue dress and stepped off a private jet into the most important night of someone else's life, and made it quietly and permanently. Something else entirely sat at her grandmother's desk in the building her family had owned for 40 years, doing the work she was born to do, and she was not performing contentment or managing the appearance of peace. She was simply actually fully herself, and that was the thing no divorce settlement could price, no conference room could contain, no pen thrown across a table could ever touch. It had always belonged to her. She had simply finally stopped pretending otherwise.